Bonsoir à toutes, mesdames et messieurs, bienvenue donc à cette deuxième conférence du cycle de l'école d'été à Aurum, donc école d'été du programme de recherche à Aurum, donc analyse de l'or et de ses usages comme matériau pictural au XVIe et XVIIe siècle. Nous avons donc cette programmation qui débute aujourd'hui et se poursuit jusqu'à jeudi, donc vous pourrez retrouver le programme à la sortie ou sur le site de l'INHA et le carnet hypothèse d'Aurum, qui rassemble un ensemble de conférences et de tables rondes ouvertes au public, avec donc, je vous présente un peu les quelques événements de la semaine à venir. Donc demain soir de 18h30 à 20h en salle Vasari, une table ronde intitulée « Exposer et éclairer l'or en contexte muséal », avec un conservateur, une scénographe et deux conceptrices lumière qui nous parleront de ces questions d'éclairage de l'or dans les musées qui nous intéressent tout particulièrement. Mercredi matin, une table ronde sur les enjeux de conservation-restauration des dorures dans le registre des bois dorés, dans le registre des icônes, dans le registre également des peintures occidentales faisant usage de l'or, avec donc différentes conservatrices restauratrices. Mercredi soir, une conférence de Maximilien Durand sur les icônes et l'or dans la tradition byzantine, donc de 18h30 à 20h également. Jeudi matin, de 9h30 à 11h, une conférence masterclass de Daniel Schlier, qui est un peintre contemporain qui utilise de l'or dans sa pratique et qui nous en parlera un peu plus. Et jeudi soir, ici même, de 18h30 à 20h, une conférence de Rebecca Zorak sur les valeurs de l'or entre Europe et Amérique et l'or dans la matérialité universelle à l'époque donc de la colonisation des Amériques. Donc ce soir, nous avons le très grand plaisir de recevoir Saskia Quenet pour cette première conférence en éditorium. Je laisse Romain Thomas l'introduire.
Merci beaucoup. Attends, est-ce que tu as le programme? Je n'ai pas le programme. Alors, j'ai le très grand plaisir d'introduire Saskia Quenet. Saskia Quenet est wissenschaftliche Assistentin, donc l'équivalent de maître de conférence à l'université de Tübingen en histoire de l'art médiéval. Alors Saskia, je crois, a grandi aux Pays-Bas, a fait ses études en Allemagne, sa thèse en Suisse et après un postdoctorat à Berkeley. Et maintenant, vous êtes à nouveau donc en Allemagne. Alors, si ce parcours est très riche du point de vue géographique et donc des écoles de pensée que ça suppose, Saskia a aussi déjà un œuvre conséquent en histoire de l'art. Elle a fait sa thèse sur la question de la feuille d'or, justement dans la peinture italienne du Quattrocento, et sur la perspective. Et donc c'est à partir de ce travail-là qu'elle va faire sa conférence ce soir. De sa thèse qui a eu le prix Willibald Sauerländer du Central Institut für Kunstgeschichte en 2021, est sorti un livre qui est paru en 2022, qui est accessible, qui est en open access, donc que vous pouvez acheter. C'est un beau livre dans une belle édition, mais qui est aussi directement accessible en ligne. Et qui est intitulé Goldgrund und Perspektive, Fra Angelico in Glanz Quattrocento, donc le fond d'or et la perspective, Fra Angelico dans l'éclat du Quattrocento, livre qui a reçu 2 prix, le Hans Janssen Prize et le Jan van Helder Prize, tous les deux en 2024. Et actuellement, Saskia prépare un livre sur la visualisation de la temporalité, les diagrammes au 9e et 10e siècle, qui devrait donner lieu à un ouvrage dans un peu plus d'1 an, voilà, qui clôturera le cycle de l'or, et puis on vous invitera pour en parler à ce moment-là. Et alors Saskia a aussi coordonné un ouvrage collectif très épais et très intéressant sur cette question, enfin, une des questions qu'elle a abordées dans sa thèse sur la relation entre la figure et le fond. Voilà, qui a donc donné lieu à un livre qui lui aussi est en open access et qui montre que justement ces relations sont moins simples qu'il ne pourrait y en avoir et qui essaie d'aller au-delà de cette dichotomie sans doute un peu facile. Et donc ce soir, on va l'écouter pour une conférence qui va avoir lieu en anglais et qui est intitulée Gold, Space and Time in Fra Angelico. Voilà, merci beaucoup Saskia. La parole.
Oui, merci beaucoup Romain et Elliot pour l'invitation. Je suis honorée d'être ici. There are things in art history we think we understand. Terms we inherit without suspicion, categories we repeat without scrutiny. Goldgrund, Goldgrund in German, faisant in French, is one of them. We teach it, identify it, label it, often with the ease of the self-evident. We use it to describe an enormous range of objects: Italo-Byzantine icons, Sienese panel paintings, Gothic manuscripts, and Etonian miniatures. We apply it retroactively across regions, media, and centuries. And with it, we silently invoke a set of assumptions: that gold functions as a background, that it flattens space, that it indexes the sacred. But what if those assumptions are not only unfounded, but actively misleading? What if the gold ground, so long accepted as a signifier of the divine, the immaterial, the transcendent, is not a stable iconographic code at all, but rather a conceptual construction with a history of misunderstandings embedded within it? My journey towards the gold ground began with material curiosity. I was interested in contemporary use of gold leaf: Yves Klein, Louise Nevelson, James Lee Byers, Ronnie Horn. In tracing how artists mobilized gold as surface, fetish, provocation, I sought historical grounding for what I assumed would be a simple question: what exactly is a gold ground? Where does it come from? How has it evolved? And what does it mean? But those answers did not exist, and the further I looked, the more I realized why that is the case. What we call gold ground is and has never been a consistent pictorial dispositif. It is not a unified visual, aesthetic, or symbolic device. It is not even, despite our terminology, a meaningful category across time, medium, or function. Instead, the term operates like a mirage. It seems to describe something concrete, but dissolves under closer imagination. Techniques to apply, use, and tool gold leaf are diverse. Materials vary, the modes of application and viewing shift not only across regions and centuries, but within oeuvres and even within single works of art, and we have already seen this morning. The optical behavior of gold, its reflective, refractive, and translucent properties resist terminological fixation. And yet, we go on using gold ground as though it were a given. Why? This question became the core of my research, because I began to realize that the term does something for the discipline of art history. Through positing the appearance of a material as a convention, history can be organized. In doing so, we sustain broader narratives in which extensive gold leaf applications remain a signifier of the medieval, flat, symbolic, unchanging, against with the Renaissance, with its linear perspective, is defined. The gold ground, in other words, serves less of an object of study than as a historiographic foil. The Cappella Nicolina in the Vatican was painted by Fra Angelico around 1447. A private papal chapel tucked away behind the ornate ceremonial halls, it contains a cycle of frescoes that narrate the life of Saint Stephen and Lawrence. In one of its fresco scenes, amid imperial architecture and narrative action, we see two guards pausing before what seems to be a golden portal. It is not a background, not a clearly defined object. Two imperial guards, caught mid-step, press into a surface. The surface is flat, opaque, saturated with a radiant yellow, seemingly impenetrable, yet paradoxically luminous. The guards cast shadows, but the door does not open. There is no trim, no doorknob, no keyhole, and yet the guard's left foot is already on the cusp of entering through the enclosed surface. What is depicted here is neither object nor backdrop. It is material and illusion, architecture and threshold, place and surface. This visual ambiguity became, for me, formative. Fra Angelico, in this moment, is not using gold, as I was able to confirm while standing finally amid his frescoes in the chapel, but he is using gold-toned oral pigments in the same way he would have used gold leaf in a different medium or context, because this is where the work of the so-called Goldgrund begins, not in what it depicts or is, but in how it operates. In my book, Goldgrund und Perspektive, I have outlined the historiographic stakes of the term in greater detail. I have traced how the Goldgrund crystallized only in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, because the phrase itself is conspicuously absent from medieval sources. Artists spoke of gold leaf, of bowl, and of burnishing, but not of grounds, or campi to refer to fields of gold. The idea that gold constitutes a uniform ground is a modern projection shaped by specific art historical debates about surface, space, and vision, and sharpened by inventions like print and photography. Consider Alois Riegel, whose 1901 study on the late Roman art industry introduced the idea of the idealer Raumgrund, the idealized spatial ground. Though Riegel spoke specifically of Byzantine mosaics, his terminology migrated quickly. Soon, scholars were referring to all medieval gold surfaces as ideal backgrounds, misunderstanding Riegel and perceiving them as visualizations of metaphysical space. The gold field became a theological projection, neither flat nor deep, but a radiant screen onto which sacred narrative could unfold. It was not meant to be entered, only contemplated. This category proved seductive. By the mid-20th century, scholars across various areas of study had adopted and expanded it. Oswald Spengler described gold in terms of mystical timelessness. Erwin Panofsky, in Perspektive as Symbolic Form, his now canonical text from 1925, juxtaposed linear perspective with pre-perspectival space, implicitly casting gold as the medium of an earlier, theologically saturated mode of representation. In identifying linear perspective not as an empirical discovery, but as a culturally specific mode of constructing, he framed perspective as the symbolic form of the modern subject, centralized, monocular, disembodied. In doing so, Panofsky reaffirmed the binary. On the one side, the subject and his vision, on the other, surface and symbol. Gold, in this picture, becomes what perspective replaces. It belongs to a world that sees differently, believes differently, imagines differently. And so, the narrative hardens. The Goldgrund is medieval, static, theological. Perspective belongs to the Renaissance as being dynamic and optical. The former is discarded as the latter is born. Other voices, more formalist, resisted this drift into symbolism. Hans Berste, for example, insisted that the Goldgrund was never meant to be spatial, ideal, or theological. It was simply decoration, a surface without mass, a pattern without depth. He proposed the notion of the endless surface, a field that does not signify space but only extends visual unity as and beyond a frame. According to this reading, gold was not a metaphysical marker but a device of visual containment. Two intertwined interpretations thus emerged in the early 20th century. On one side, the Goldgrund as mystical space, on the other as ornamental flatness. Wolfgang Schöne offered an optical reading of gold as Eigenlicht, light that shines from within rather than reflecting an external source. These interpretations are shaped by a deep desire to make gold into a symbol. But what if we resist that desire? I have argued that the symbolic overreading of gold has come at the expense of understanding its material working. We have overlooked what gold leaf actually does. Visually, haptically, how gold leaf is layered, punched, incised, burnished, painted, tooled. Scholars instead perpetuated a dualism, gold as a symbol of the beyond, perspective as a logic of this world. In this view, the 15th century marks a clean break. Gold recedes, depth advances. Fra Angelico, born just before 1400, becomes a painter on the cusp, and a transitional figure still entranced by gold, yet already leaning into perspectival modes of representation. Gold leaf, however, remained an iconographic code rather than a descriptive challenge. Gold, however, quite simply, behaves differently from pigment. It catches light. It is partially translucent but also resists absorption. Depending on the viewer's angle and the surrounding environment, it appears either dark and dull or bright and shiny. In this sense, gold poses a methodological problem. It resists reproduction, especially in photography. Its shimmer and glitter are flattened, its reflective complexity lost. In reproductions, gold becomes yellow. In printed illustrations, it becomes beige. What we encounter digitally is not gold, but its ghost. And yet these ghosts populate our textbooks, shape our lectures, and define our surveys. This is not a neutral loss. It affects how we have written and are still writing the history of art. What I propose, therefore, is a turn towards the surface, not as a metaphor, but as analytic. Gold is not a backdrop to painting. It is a working surface, an operative layer. Artists respond to materials. They work with them, not against them. They know and knew their properties. Gold leaf that is being used today to restore medieval panel paintings and other surfaces is, in a best-case scenario, still produced exactly as it was centuries ago through manual labor. There is a marked difference between handmade and machine-made gold. The difference may seem doubtful to anyone unfamiliar with the experience, but as a comparison, think of a string instrument. A violin made by a luthier sounds fundamentally different from one made in a factory, and no trained musician would prefer performing historical repertoire with a factory-made instrument. The craftsmanship of the batiloro, the gold beater, begins long before gold becomes a leaf. It starts with melting. Now, melting gold is a delicate affair. Gold is a noble metal, but if you heat it too much or for too long, it can evaporate. That's why it's melted in clay vessels, which offer a natural protection. From there, it's poured into a hollow form and hardens almost immediately. While still soft, the compression process begins. The gold is then rolled out, pressed and stretched, and reweighed in long coils. Then it's cut into small squares with scissors. These squares are placed into what we call a book or booklet. Each book is made of parchment pages that have first been rubbed with dry glue and soap, applied with the help of a hare or rabbit's paw. Each booklet is then wrapped in leather, and here's where the labor becomes intense. The gold is struck from above up to 10,000 times. With every blow, the temperature of the gold rises up to 80 degrees Celsius. And then the process begins again and again. Eventually, the gold leaf is trimmed and packaged. In the artist's studio, the gold leaf is then laid out on a gilder's cushion made of calf skin and picked up with a brush made from squirrel hair. It's then transferred, so laid, applied, or shot, as can be said, onto the bowl under which we find a layer of gesso on top of a wooden panel, and you've seen a diagram of that also this morning. The step of applying gold leaf is extraordinarily delicate. The gold is now so thin that a single breath, half an exhale through the nose, is enough to send it flying. If that happens, the leaf is ruined. It can't be flattened again. At best, it might be used for tiny corrections or can be turned into granular gold like shell gold. But there is more we need to acknowledge here. Gold came to Europe from the continent of Africa, mostly Western Africa, although there were mines also in Eastern Europe. Gold was extracted under most dangerous conditions by enslaved laborers and shipped across the continent. The history of gold in the Middle Ages is brutal and violent in many ways. We've already encountered rabbit's paws and calf skin, squirrel hair, and glue made from deer antlers. Gilding and gold beating has never been a particular conscientious craft. Moreover, in the images I've shown, you'll have noticed something else, the gendered division of labor. That too demands our reflection if we work on gold leaf and aim to speak about it diligently. More than that, I would argue that these aspects, the origin, the labor, the violence, the gendered work, do play a role in how gold was perceived. Even in the 15th century, these historical facts shaped the very iconography of gold then and now. Fra Angelico, a Dominican friar from Fiesole close to Florence, works with gold leaf. He experiments with gold leaf as a surface, as a source of light. He uses gold to represent and render spaces, employs gold as a material that moves and produces sight in time. With gold, he interrogates visual conditions. In doing so, he does not treat gold as any other painterly material, of course. He tests it. He builds a pictorial language around its resistance, its brilliance, its slipperiness, its tendency to overpower pigments. His painting does not overcome gold, it thinks and grapples with it. Let us consider one of his Madonna dell'Umiltà. In the St. Petersburg panel, gold leaf covers almost the entire surface, from the top to the very bottom of the wooden panel. In the staggered layers of metal, paints, and pigments, it is precious gold that provides the ground for the depiction of the seated Virgin. Mary is dressed in a red garment, a dark blue cloak, and a golden nimbus. Complemented by a diaphanous veil, delicate golden linings on the trim of her blue mantle define the lavish robe that lies in heavy folds across the floor. She rests on a slender silk pillow while holding the Christ child on her left knee. The picture plane can be divided into two zones. At the top, two angels in vivid silks stand out against the gilded surface. Here, three nimbi guide the play of light in the gleaming gold. In the lower part, two haloed angels with instruments turn their colorful and sharply foreshortened wings toward the spectator, while the plane is dominated by the intricate design of a foreign textile. Calyxes, vines, and birds, spirals and star-shaped ornaments form a dense weave that remains parallel to the picture plane. Reversing their realities, the two pairs of angels stand out against two distinct grounds, and, in this case, realms. The panel's lower margin is marked by the base of a golden vase holding 3 white lilies. Mary's locus, her place within the pictorial space, is bound by the lower red and gold textile and the upper spread of gold. With dark blue pigment standing out against the gold leaf, the shape of her figure appears as a solid form against her surroundings. Her body is contoured almost sculpturally, while the outlines of the vase and the slender silk pillow graphically emphasize the absence of a throne. In refraining from straining any volume, the pillow almost blends in with the vegetal pattern of the red and gold textile. Likewise, the figure of the vase with 3 lilies remains emphatically uncontoured. Nothing beyond its outline sets the depicted object apart from the red and gold fabric. Finally, a third distinctive method used by Angelico to distinguish forms can be observed in the red and gold fabric itself. Here, he relies entirely on the material distinction between red color and gold leaf. Angelico covers the precious gold leaf with red paint. This superimposition of red hue creates visual ambiguity. Although the red paint forefronts the gold leaf by outlining the pattern of the cloth, gold leaf applications run from the very top of the panel throughout the bottom edge. The calyxes, birds, vines, spirals, and star-shaped ornaments now appear as golden figures on a crimson ground, instead of the other way around. Thick coats of luster paint produce an opaque red that covers the precious gold. In this context, let us reconsider Leon Battista Alberti's famous critique of gold leaf in painting. The conventional narrative has often read Alberti's remark in De Pictura or De la Pittura as signaling a turning point in the Quattrocento, the moment when the luminous artifice of gold leaf gave way to the illusionistic subtlety of oil-based modeling and shadowing. But this story, I believe, is too linear, and it obscures the nuances of what Alberti actually wrote. In chapter 49 of his treatise, Alberti observes, in fact, as the admiration and greater praise of an artist is based on colors, thus also one can observe that after you have placed gold on a flat panel, the major parts of those surfaces that one needed to represent as bright and brilliant appear dark to the observers, and other surfaces perhaps which should be darker result more luminous. This is often interpreted as a technical indictment. Gold, Alberti suggests, does not behave according to the logic of natural light. It subverts the painter's ability to organize tonal relationships, confusing light and shadow. But what he critiques here is not gold per se. Rather, he describes the difficulty of controlling its optical behavior on flat surfaces. He sharply observes how, paradoxically, gold can make what should be luminous appear dull and what should be shadowed appear bright. This alone would, therefore, be insufficient to suggest that Alberti rejects gold, because what he is interested in to explore in his writings is how certain colors or genres of colors work well together and others do not. Grace, without doubt, will result when colors will be combined with colors with a certain accurate diligence, as, for example, if you paint Diana while she leads choruses, it is convenient that green cloths are assigned to this nymph, to that next one white, to this one who precedes purple, to the other with follows yellow. And one after another let them be dressed indeed according to a variety of such colors, that bright colors always match with some dark colors of a different kind. He then goes on to provide another specific example, one that has been surprisingly underappreciated in its implications. He writes, But there are those who utilize gold in a disproportionate way because they think that gold leads a certain majesty to the historia. I do not approve of them at all. Indeed, if I would like to paint Virgil's Dido with a golden quiver, who kept her hair in a knot with a golden clasp, for whom a golden band girded her dress, and who rode with golden reins, and in general all things shone because of the gold, I would strive nevertheless to imitate by means of colors rather than by means of gold, that abundance of golden rays that strikes observer's eye from every part. Alberti is not referring to a sacred image, but to a mythological one. It is Dido, not the Madonna, who is decked out in gold, her quiver, her clasp, her reins. Everything sparkles. The problem is not gold as such, but its excessive and indiscriminate use. Alberti critiques the illusion of majesty produced through literal material richness, calling instead for a painterly simulation of splendor. And I quote him again, I would strive nevertheless to imitate by means of colors rather than by means of gold, that abundance of golden rays that strikes observers' eyes from every part. This is an argument for moderation and pictorial discipline, not a wholesale rejection of gold leaf. It is telling that Alberti never even mentions something like a campo, ground or gold ground, or speaks of larger fields or backgrounds. His concern lies instead with accessories, applied gold for embellishment, possibly pastilla or mordant gilding, not the presence of gold leaf as ground. And this distinction matters. In Fra Angelico's Madonna dell'Umiltà, we see a painter and Dominican friar who was acutely aware of the optical instability of gold and made that central. Angelico uses its fluctuating luminosity as an artistic tool. His gold is not static, neither ornamental. It is layered, scratched, and deliberately veiled beneath pigment to guide and control its appearance. Angelico has not just painted a figure on or in gold. He has made gold the active material of humility. The Dominican literalizes the etymological connection between humilitas and humus, between humility and ground, as Millard Meese has noted, by embedding the Madonna in a shimmering visual field that calls attention to both material preciousness and ontological rootedness. Gold, then, becomes the medium through which the Virgin's humbleness is elevated, not by reduction, but by inversion. From a technical standpoint, this is daring. Angelico makes use of sgraffito techniques, glazing with red luster paint over gold and then scratching it away to form intricate details, spirals, feathers, floral motifs. In doing so, he leverages the dual capacity of gold to appear both brilliant and obscure, a phenomenon noted not only by Alberti but already by Giannino Cennini. Gold, depending on light and angle, can be either luminous or darkened, proceed or recede. In contrast to the example of Dido, where gold is merely applied decoratively, Angelico's approach is structural. His entire composition is layered to reflect a theology of incarnation. Mary's red garment, produced with similar layering of pigment, becomes not only clothing but also materia, a bodily ground from which Christ takes form. The Virgin is not just seated humbly, she is the humus, the field, and the figure simultaneously. This is why and where I believe we must challenge art historical genealogies. Rather than reading Fra Angelico's practice as conservative in light of Alberti's alleged reforms, I suggest we read Alberti more carefully and Goldleaf more attentively. Alberti calls for clarity, for the measured distribution of tonal contrasts. Angelico gives us precisely that, but by means that understood gold leaf as a material beyond today's categories. His red and gold textiles hover in perceptual ambiguity. They are both figure and ground, space and surface. In light of all this, I would argue that Angelico still, I would say, anticipated Angelico's call in a different register. He understood the problems of optical conflict, but rather than reject gold, he harnessed its instability to enrich rather than undermine the devotional image. Where Alberti sees danger in visual inconsistency, Angelico discovers opportunity. Opportunity to reflect on humility as the very paradox of divine presence within material splendor. In the end, the Madonna della Umiltà in St. Petersburg offers a profound answer to Alberti, not in words but in layers. It proposes that gold can serve humility, not contradict it, that figure and ground can coexist in oscillation, and that the richest surfaces may sometimes reveal the deepest truth, not through clarity alone, but through the shimmering tension between what is seen and what is sensed. This tension deepens when we turn to his Annunciation panels. In these encounters, set within architectural enclosures, Fra Angelico explores linear construction. He lays out a grid, stages events within measured space. And yet, gold persists. Sometimes it recedes to the halos and ornaments, sometimes it reappears as radiant detail. It is never simply residual. In Fra Angelico's early Annunciation for San Domenico in Fiesole, luminous temporal colors structure the scene, and gold is employed with precision, not abundance. This contrast does not indicate a rejection of gold, but a calculated modulation of its visual and conceptual possibilities. Fra Angelico juxtaposes two events, the Annunciation to Mary and the expulsion from paradise, within a seemingly coherent spatial construct. The unified architectural setting, a 4-bay loggia, stages both scenes. This visual field, however, is punctuated by a broad gold ray composed of 25 narrow strips of leaf, which descends diagonally from the upper left corner to the breast of the Virgin, intersecting the space between Gabriel and Mary. This beam, accompanied by the white dove of the Holy Spirit, introduces not only divine agency, but a powerful axis that cuts across a perspectival order. The gold ray does not merely illustrate divine light, it asserts a spatial logic of its own. It is material present, reflecting ambient light, catching the viewer's eye, and disrupting the painting's depth. The beam's orientation and intensity links divine source to Marian reception, articulating the moment of incarnation through luminous incision. Gabriel's hands are folded in greeting, aligned with the central vertical axis. Mary's gaze meets his, her body subtle turning, her arms crossed over her chest. Her book rests on her right knee. Attention is distributed across the image. The gesture of ascent is foregrounded. Their interaction is both symmetrical and skewed, with Gabriel and Mary mirroring each other, visually balanced but not rigidly centered. The architectural setting, the loggia, is painted with the help of geometrical instruments, like compass and ruler. Fra Angelico does not rely on a vanishing point, or punctus centricus in Albertian terms, to construct the space of the loggia. Instead, he uses golden ratio to divide the plane into two unequal parts and positions the architectural elements accordingly. The first column is placed in the middle of the broader left segment, the second exactly halfway between this and the right edge of the painting. Rather than receding from the facade into the depth, the loggia therefore unfolds outward from the pictorial surface. Even the light on the wall of Mary's chamber follows this geometric logic. It doesn't come from the golden beam of the incarnation or the garden window, but marks an exact spatial correspondence within the layout of the columns. Fra Angelico's manipulation of spatial cues is neither accidental nor incomplete or naive. He integrates perspectival, which means actually optical modes of representation, not as a dogma, but as a flexible tool. He integrates multiple visual registers to accommodate movement. The marble floor, for instance, resists linear recession by means of necessity, as the multicolored hues of paint cannot recede as, for example, a checkered floor could. All these pictorial elements, the 25 strips of gold leaf, the marbled floor, the golden paint fabric behind Mary on the right, draping the stool on which she is sitting, and the geometrical construction of the loggia, participate in what could be called an architecture of vision, modes of seeing based not on convention, but on motion and multiplicity. The image accommodates shifts in position, distance, and light. This is not merely aesthetic, it is epistemic. It suggests that vision is not a neutral operation, but a structured encounter shaped by material and spiritual forces alike. This approach aligns less with Alberti's writings on proportions, as I will now argue, and more with earlier and concurrent optical theories. Medieval scholars such as Alhazen, Robert Grosseteste, and Roger Bacon understood vision as the interplay of emitted and received species of light and surface. These models accommodate reflection, refraction, and multiplicity. Fra Angelico's use of gold, I propose, is informed by these conceptions. While perspective in the modern sense of the word anchors bodies both in front of and within the image, optics insist on temporality. In this way, Angelico's space of the Annunciation is, as it cannot not be, pre-modern. Not because it lacks construction, but because it simply does not depict post-Newtonian space, a space that is homogeneous, isotropic, and endless. Angelico's setting allows for multiple loci, places, multiple times and places depicted within one realm. The expulsion of Adam and Eve happens right outside Mary's room, in the lush spring garden inhabited by flowers so distinctively they can be identified botanically. I think there are like over 100 in there, and there are identified already. Fra Angelico does not simulate space, he proposes it. Which brings us to the heart of the matter. Art historical scholarship has posited that gold gives way to depth. Surface yields to space, the medieval submits to the Renaissance. Fra Angelico, however, stages places not through illusionistic recession, but through a logic internal to the gold itself. The radiant field of optical operations becomes a carrier of geometrical operations. The third and last painting I want to discuss here tonight builds on this and is one that resists conclusion. 10 years after Angelico painted his famous Prado Annunciation, he once again covered the whole surface of a panel with gold leaf. Amid 80 angels and saints, surrounded by golden rays of light, Mary and Christ appear on blue clouds. Christ holds a precious gemstone between thumb and index finger, ready to adorn his mother and bride. The iconography of the scene refers to Brigitta of Sweden's vision of the heavenly couple as described in her revelations. Saints and music-making angels equipped with various instruments and golden nimbi direct the viewer's gaze to the optical center of the panel painting and thus to the center of the concentric rays traced into the gold leaf surface. These tracings provoke active seeing. They reinforce the concentric order of the saints and angels. Through them, we're invited to contemplate the tension between full-surface gold leaf application and figurative representation, a tension already present in the Vatican fresco from the beginning. Similarly, the question that arises here is which artistic strategies Fra Angelico used to depict and represent light, both as the unearthly light of paradise and as a medium, with all its reflective and refractive capacities as movement in time. In my book, I distinguish between light as medium and light as metaphor, drawing on Albert the Great and Thomas Aquinas. Following Alan Beer's insights from the 1980s, I propose that the significance of gold lies not necessarily in its direct association with the divine, but in how it serves as a material that invites the viewer to distinguish between envisioned heavenly light and the actual lived experience of light. This distinction prompts two essential questions. First, how did people in the 15th century conceptualize divine light? And second, how did they discuss natural, non-metaphoric light? Moreover, were these two forms of light considered to be connected? Following Aristoteles via Thomas Aquinas and earlier theologians, the universe was understood as consisting of concentric spheres. The innermost sphere is dense and heavy. As one moves outward, the matter becomes purer, lighter, more illuminated. The outermost sphere is the firmament, like a shell encasting the earth, comparable to the outer layer of an onion. Beyond lies God's realm, divided into two heavens. The first houses both spiritual and bodily entities, Christ's glorified body, Mary, angels, the blessed. This is the celestial realm Fra Angelico depicts. Yet the Trinity, so God himself, resides in the highest heaven, the Empyrean. While descriptions of the Trinitarian heaven remain in disguise, the Empyrean is the realm of light. Dante's Commedia provides a famous description and depiction. The Empyrean is not composed of Earth's four elements, but of a substance closest to God, the quintessence or ether. Below the moon on Earth, light becomes visible because creation participates in divine structure. Among earthly materials, those that best radiate light, crystals, colored glass, polished metal, and gold, were believed to inherit and reflect heavenly light. In the Empyrean, life ceases, time dissolves into eternity. Only contemplation, imperfect on earth, reaches fullness there. The Dominican Thomas Aquinas refers to the 1 Corinthians 13:12, "For now we see only in a reflection, as in a mirror, then we shall see face to face." The gold leaf in Fra Angelico's panel for Florence main hospital, I will argue, expresses this expectation. In gesturing toward a place and time yet to come, it presents, so it makes present, a moment that is longed for, but still out of reach. The dark clouds along the lower edge mark the possibility of this transition from the earthly sublunary sphere to the heavenly. Angelico shares his vision with the viewer, as he was taught by his predecessors. Thomas himself is depicted on the left. Mary Magdalene, in red, looks directly at us on the right. The golden panel is a gesture of hope and promise at the hospital church Sant'Egidio. But in all its ephemeral glimmer, it is also a vision that can be taken away instantly. As we move in front of the image, what appears bright and shiny can cast a shadow momentarily. Whether bright or dark, the concentric lines stand out as rays on a shadowed surface or as firm and darkened lines on a lit-up plane. An effect, as I mentioned earlier, already described by Giannino Cennini in the 14th century. Depth is created by the arrangement of figures and clouds, overlapping wings, arms, faces, larger front figures, smaller back ones, lighter and darker tempera pigments modeling their robes. Above all, however, depth emerges through innumerable concentric golden rays. Dante's final canto of the Paradiso describes the experience of being drawn toward the Empyrean light, a light that remains unapproachable. Reflections on the robes of Christ and Mary confirm the presence of a central light source located behind them. While the Empyrean's light source, God, can be understood as occupying this very center of the panel, it remains concealed. However, the golden tracings direct our attention to this hidden source of light. The source is located precisely where the coats of Mary and Christ meet. This is significant because God, who is present in the Trinitarian heaven, cannot be depicted. As Thomas references in 1 Timothy 6:16, God is described as living in unapproachable light. So he's living in unapproachable light, whom no one has seen or can see. Fra Angelico understands that the source of divine light, representing the inaccessible heaven of the Trinity, must remain hidden. The piercing point of the compass is covered in darkness, yet his rays of light all point to this specific place, the one true source of all divine and natural light on earth, like all the source of all divine and natural light on earth. His rays reference a body of light. The brilliant terminals of emitting rays signifying this luminous body in depth. Tracing the rays towards the periphery of the panel, a star-shaped form emerges. Around 1420, Paolo Uccello constructed a polyhedron, a figure with flat polygonal faces and straight edges for the mosaic floor in San Marco in Venice. Composed of triangles in different light and dark tesserae, they invoke the illusion of a three-dimensional conceived figure on the floor's surface. The outline of the polyhedron can be described as a zigzag circle or, more simply, a star. The illusion of a three-dimensional object is only evoked by the tessera in the very middle of the mosaic. Uccello varies the shape of the triangles in such a way that the center of the body is now off-center. Uccello creates an asymmetrical figure to emphasize the three-dimensionality of his depiction. He is foreshortening the one spike of his polyhedron that points in our direction. This is what you should have said. The yellow celestial body of a fresco by Uccello is composed of a multitude of concentric lines. Yeah, because I showed it a bit too late. So the off-center position here in the middle, that's what I wanted to describe, that this one white triangle is bigger than the others, which creates this shift. The yellow celestial body in a fresco, also by Uccello, composed of a multitude of concentric lines, which also form the outline of a star. They also form the outline of a star. Here, Uccello is confronted with a problem that Fra Angelico is facing as well. How to depict a circular body, so not an architecture, but a circular body, which poses distinct problems on a flat surface. Fra Angelico's concentric lines, and this is what matters, are by no means an ornamental element in the sense of an effect-enhancing upgrading of the flat gold leaf surface. They must be understood as a representation of a body of light radiating in all directions. The perception of Fra Angelico's golden rays as a representation of a body of light becomes even more convincing when looking at Ghirlandaio's reinterpretation of Fra Angelico's panel painting. Commissioned by the Cardinal, the large altar painting was made in the Florentine Ghirlandaio workshop and then brought to Narni, where it was installed in San Girolamo. We can rule out that Ghirlandaio did not know Fra Angelico's golden panel in Sant'Egidio, and we have all reason to assume that the Cardinal explicitly requested a depiction of the coronation of Mary based on his model. Like Fra Angelico, Ghirlandaio covered a large part of his panel with gold leaf. Mary and Christ are located on a blue platform inhabited by seraphim and cherubim. The concentric engravings produce the outline of a star, like in Paolo Uccello and Fra Angelico. However, while the center of the light source in Fra Angelico's panel painting remains hidden, Ghirlandaio decides to emphasize the absence of the light source radically with the celestial body, harnessing what can't be encountered. He applies a three-dimensional solid hemisphere of gilded wood. It protrudes into the space in front of the panel, into the viewer's realm. It occupies its place haptically, just as the rays of light do in Fra Angelico's panel painting visually. Ghirlandaio's depiction can help us understand how Angelico's solution to depict heavenly light was perceived in the Quattrocento. What exactly then did, is the next question, Ghirlandaio choose to emphasize from what he encountered in Angelico's work? I've quoted the famous verse from the letter to the Corinthians that evokes the analogy of perceiving light as if through a mirror's reflection. Taking this analogy seriously, the question now arises, does Ghirlandaio's puzzling wooden add-on to his panel suggest engagement with this metaphor? Although the Middle Ages have a long-standing tradition working with the reflecting and refracting precious materials and metals such as gold and silver, bronze, copper, iron, and steel. We have seen all of them today. Although there are numerous depictions of hand mirrors in medieval manuscripts, and although the mirror appears in poetry, in exegetical and optical theoretical sources, hardly any mirrors or mirror fragments seem to have survived from the Western Middle Ages until the end of the 15th century. That's where it starts a bit. This gap in medieval material culture is as surprising as it is difficult to explain, but it does allow speculation as to whether we have been looking for representations in the wrong places. From historical sources, we know that medieval glass mirrors were often framed in wood and gilded with gold leaf, making the gold not just a decorative element, but a functional part of the mirror's reflective surface. These mirrors were typically circular, enhancing their ability to concentrate light. The study of convex and concave mirrors belongs to the field of catoptrics, a subfield of optics concerned with the reflection of light, deriving from the Greek word katoptron, meaning mirror. In De Natura Locorum, Robert Grosseteste explains how concave mirrors, with their ability to concentrate light at a single point, could even ignite a fire by focusing the sun's rays. And I quote, "What reflection is and can do can be observed in polished, especially hollow bodies. If one puts a concave mirror against the sun, a fire is lit in it because, as said, all rays reflected from the surface of the concave body converge in one point. At this point and all around lies the place of burning." End quote. This principle of focused light helps us understand how real mirrors, particularly concave ones, capture, concentrate, and reflect light in a blinding, almost transformative way. Earlier, I argued that Fra Angelico's panel invites us to enter paradise, aligning with the Dominican view that humans can eventually become angels. Now, in the context of interpreting the gold as a reflective or even transformative surface, another layer of meaning emerges. There are 6 angels who are closest to the source of light in the center of the panel painting. One angel on the left, dressed in a bright red robe, is shown behind the Queen of Heaven in a movement from left to right. The angel, who can be identified as Michael on the basis of his M initial in the silk of his garment, looks over his left shoulder into the Empyrean light. Defined by Augustine as beings created by God, the question of the materiality of the angels, God's messengers, initially remained controversial. Thomas Aquinas conceived of the angels as beings without matter, as etheric beings, and took over from Dionysius the Areopagite the idea of the angels as spiritual lights and pure and very clear clarissimum mirrors. In Angelico's Paradiso, the circle of angels, therefore, not only becomes an image of divine light, but more precisely, a mirror image. Theologically, this very idea is expressed in Paul's second letter to the Corinthians, when he prophesies, because we all, with unveiled face, reflect the glory of the Lord as we are being transformed into his image, end quote. As we have seen, to understand Angelico's choice of materials and techniques, descriptions of leaf-gilt glass mirrors play just as an important role as verses from the Book of Wisdom, in which not only Christ but also Mary becomes a reflection of the eternal light, and immaculate mirrors, speculum sine macula, of divine activity. At the end of my presentation, I want to return to my reading of Fra Angelico's depiction of the Empyrean heaven, literally understood as a burning heaven. His concentric rays serve as a pictorial element that points to an inaccessible light source acting both as a body of light and as a mirror. This brings us back to gold leaf as a material that emphasizes the tension between mimesis and material. The history of the so-called Goldgrund can be written in manifold ways. The history of the use of gold leaf, however, can only be written in correlation to the history of art history, which introduced the term Goldgrund more than a century ago, when our field of study only started to develop in search for words to describe what was encountered. Fra Angelico's use of gold provokes movement. Whether dull or shiny, the traces stand out, either dull or shiny, the traces stand out, either dark or light from the carefully gilded surface. When these lines shine brightly, they create the impression of protruding spatially, while the grooves appearing as shadows seem to move into the background. As a perspectively rendered three-dimensional object, they provoke a gaze that enters the Empyrean heaven, inviting the viewer to participate in the search for the heavenly paradise. What Angelico is exploring here, and this is my concluding remark, is the possibility of depicting distances with and in gold, defining space through time. In doing so, he recognizes the fact that we, as spectators, see with two eyes, that we are no cyclops, and that we move in front of the picture plane, since only God is the motionless mover. Necessarily and programmatically, the image exists at the confluence of imitation and material realness. Angelico's perspectival modes of representation are not outside the gilding, but embedded within. Contrary to the art historical narrative that Goldgrund disappeared with perspective in the 15th century, Fra Angelico demonstrates that gold leaf, optics, and perspective complement each other. They are neither opposites nor rivals. His paintings challenge us to attend to surface not as effect, but as cause, to see tooling not as an ornament, but as operation, to recognize that space can be built through light and that geometry can be embedded in shimmer. We are challenged to suspend schemes we have inherited, to resist the pull of succession, the comfort of genealogy, and the belief in teleology. Gold behaves differently from pigment, yes. Not only on the surface, but also in time. Gold forces us to experience the act of seeing as a temporal process. In doing so, we move, shift, recalibrate. The image is never fully visible. In that sense, Angelico's panel is not about the coronation alone, neither about the empyrean, the heaven behind the last heaven. It is about the conditions under which such a moment might be seen. Angelico's long shawms, double-reed woodwind instruments with flared bells reaching beyond bodily borders can, therefore, only be heard in the present moment, since all sound, sense, and sight is ultimately ephemeral. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Saskia, for this mind-blowing change of perspective on Goldgrund. On a le temps pour quelques échanges de questions qui peuvent se faire en anglais ou en français, on traduit, comme vous le souhaitez. Je passe la parole à Rebecca Zorak pour le micro.
Thank you, Saskia, for this wonderful talk. Just really illuminating. I had one small comment and a question. So the comment was, in your reading of Alberti, it just suddenly struck me in a way had never before that Dido is kind of a figure of excess also in the Aeneid, and so something about the sort of rhetorical place of Dido might be kind of part of what's going on with his use of gold there. So that was very interesting. The other question is, you mentioned something about the kind of violence embedded in the extraction of gold, and that's something I've been thinking a lot about with respect to the colonial situation in the Americas a century later, and kind of trying to think about how that situation might be kind of translated into interpretation of works that inevitably used those materials. And I kept kind of waiting for more on that from you, but I wonder if you have any speculations on kind of how to think about that, whether it's Angelico or elsewhere. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I was hoping for, but also very scared of this question, and I thought you might ask it. I was hesitant to say more about this. I think that sort of I tried to start maybe a feminist reading also of the Madonna dell'Umiltà here in sort of the in relation to the humility and the humus. So that's where a starting point where I'm really interested in. I think that what I experience myself right now is that because we're in this moment in time in 2025, we get new words to describe certain things, and but we still have this gap of 500 years, and it's I'm struggling to not overinterpret, of course, but I'm I really want to dive deeper into these questions, because I do think in at least 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years, hopefully, it will be for us completely impossible to not see these layers of meaning when we talk about gold, right? And so there is this shift here, and I just want to, and I think it's going to be very interesting to see how that really informs our seeing, since language always informs our seeing. That's not a real answer, but let's keep the conversation going.
Oui, bonjour, je suis Bruno Haas, professeur à Paris, Université de Paris. Eh bien, shall I speak English as well, or what do you think? I'm not sure. Everyone, is it okay? Okay. Well, I would like to know, I think you're quite right to describe things that people didn't maybe describe in that, we have our language, we have to speak our language, even if we're speaking about old things. But when we do so, then we like to dig very deep in it. And so we had some discussions about that.
Yes, we had.
We are not new about that. But I would like to to ask you how you see that today. You remember that I wrote about the heraldics series. You remember and that's not only about gold, it's about metals in general, and the difference between metals and colors, which is quite established in heraldics. And there's this regular about the change between metals and colors, obligatory for blazons, and obviously because every metal has this, even silver, even though very often silver is lost, and gold is still there, but there's this contrast is structural for medieval imagery. And so the problem about silver is that silver is white. In heraldics, it's the same. Silver and white is the same, and that means that we have example. If you take the Petersburg image, you can't really see it on the photograph. That's always the problem. You don't really see it on the photograph. But the Madonna has a white veil round her neck.
Yes.
Yeah. Maybe the other one is better. You see it a little bit better. It has a white veil. She has a white veil, and the photograph doesn't show it. And Jesus has white as well.
It also looks quite green here now.
Anyway, on the photo, it's really ugly, beside.
No, I see your points, right? I mean, we have talked about these rules and the colors that have to be able to distinguish, right? So the white veil is here to really mark the transition between colors that are in one family, right? That are sort of perceived in a similar way. And I think that is really, I mean, you applied these rules beautifully on this crucifixes, right? And with the Giotto crosses, for example, we've been looking at that. I think that is absolutely valid, I think, but what I've found interesting also when you really stand in front of it to sort of try to emphasize also how he, in this particular case, really employs all these different modes of what gold has to offer and what paint has to offer to really create a palette that goes way beyond these binary structures or these dichotomies. And I think that was really that was my aim today.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. That's true. But I'm wondering, the thing is about this veil here. We have a campus, a golden campus, and then the incarnation. And incarnation is a quite complicated color for heraldics, especially because it's no heraldic color, because there's always a
so the skin color, like
skin
the
color, yes.
incarnation.
Skin color, yes. And if you want to put skin color on gold, then you have to distinguish it through a color, which is blue. And then you have to distinguish the color of skin from the blue by a metal. And there's no second metal, but there's white. And this is very classical. You have gold, blue, white, and then skin color. And I find the problem with, if you just look on gold and you describe spatial effects, as in the coronation, we have
surface effects. Yeah.
Surface effect, and it's really getting a sphere, and that's very smart. You show that it's a sphere, but how have we to understand the geometrical structure of such a sphere? It's no Cartesian sphere.
Which sphere? In the coronation?
In the coronation, yes. Yeah, you showed us that the photo shows it more or less, but on the painting we can see it better. There is a sort of a sphere exploding in all directions. It's not just flat, But the geometrics of a sphere, how have we to interpret this sort of geometrics? And we are always interpreting it in a Cartesian way, intuitively. It's very difficult to do in another way.
Well, I tried not to do, and I mean, this was my interpretation of this sphere I delivered in my presentation.
Yes.
So
I'm wondering if
there's
you would
more in the book.
Yeah, Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
If you would use the laws of heraldics and other things, then you may be able to, to really do something else than Cartesian geometrics. Coming back,
I'm not sure if I do Cartesian geometrics, but I also don't think we really contradict each other. So.
Philippe Cordes, thank you very much. I have two questions. And one is about the notion of shadow. Mm-hmm. Did you mean it and as a notion describing the image in a mirror or in relation to light? I guess it could be a strong notion for the Middle Ages. And the other remark, question not related, is that you worked pretty much against historiography, and which I fully understand, and you had to. And
I tried to provoke a little today,
yes,
because everybody's also already so tired.
And we need that to step away and to find something new. But if we try to understand 20th century writing about gold, it's about understanding the wish for a very abstract transcendence, actually. And it goes from Vienna modernism to probably fascism. Wolfgang Schöne, we can't think around about it. And maybe that could be a way to somehow repoliticize in another way. She's not there anymore. But
she left 20 seconds ago,
okay.
I think.
So it's not an answer to the question, but it's a very political way to understand actually the fascination for gold as it developed from there. I don't know, but in the 20th century certainly. Yeah. And it might be not working against the historiography, but which you had to, but now trying to understand actually what happened there with the black and white photography, it must be also connected. Yeah. And it's a large question I have hearing you.
No, I mean, there's so many ways to read art historical writing of the 20th century, right? I think that would be extremely interesting also to read, to focus on these implications here. And I mean, yes, I did provoke a little here, but I don't think that I mean, I spent a great time reading all these sources, and I mean, of course, they're great ideas in them. Yeah, but it's a huge question where these ideas come from, and what I found so striking is reading Alois Riegel again and again and again, 1901, talking about this idealized Raumgrund, so this idealized space ground. What he really means is not that it's ideal and sort of in a normative way. It is really ideal for what an image should do, being sort of in between, like being material and have a mimetic sort of responsibility to reality or something like that. So, and that is that's a very interesting and very complex thought. And somehow, because he picked like idealer Raumgrund, it completely took off and got the story on its own. That was really not what Riegel actually meant, and I think that would that's still my interest, where I would sort of start again, like maybe see how, like, why was Riegel so misunderstood basically, and what implications does that have? But thank you.
Right.
Also in French, I mean.
Thank you so much, Saskia. I think we can clap.
Yes.